I paid my mother's debt, and that same night, she threw me out. I realized too late. It was only love.
My name is Maya Lawson. I'm 31 years old, and for the past 6 years, I've worked as a financial consultant in Portland, Oregon, helping small families avoid the kind of debt that can quietly destroy a home long before anyone outside notices. Most of my clients think I chose this work because I'm good with numbers. That's only half true. I chose it because when I was 19, I emptied my future into a cashier's check, handed it to the woman who gave me life, and by midnight, she had thrown me out of her house like I was the worst mistake she had ever made. People say heartbreak has a sound. For me, it was never a scream or a slammed door. It was the soft hiss of paper sliding across a kitchen table. The receipt that proved my mother's debt was paid in full. The receipt I thought would save our family. The receipt she stared at for 10 silent seconds before looking up and saying with more disgust than gratitude, "So now you think you own me." That was the night I learned something children of difficult parents understand far too late. Love, when it flows only one way, can become a kind of slow starvation. You keep giving, hoping the next sacrifice will finally be enough. But some people don't know how to receive love unless it comes wrapped in obedience, silence, and self-erasure. I grew up in a town called Fairwick, Missouri, the kind of place where church parking lots were full every Sunday, where people waved from porches, where everyone said, "Family is everything," with such confidence that you almost forgot how many homes hid pain behind clean curtains and trimmed hedges. When I was little, my mother had a softness to her. I want to be fair about that. Memory gets cruel when it only keeps the sharpest edges, and there was a time, before everything hardened, when she sang while washing dishes. Her name was Elaine Lawson, and in my earliest memories, she smelled like rose hand cream and coffee. She would tuck loose hair behind my ear while I sat at the kitchen counter drawing crooked houses and impossible flowers. Back then, my father was still alive, and as long as he was in the room, our home stayed balanced. My father, Thomas Lawson, ran a small auto repair shop on the edge of town. He wasn't a loud man. He had patient hands and a tired smile, and the habit of listening all the way through when someone spoke. Even when money was tight, he made our house feel secure. Not rich, not polished, but steady. There is a kind of wealth in steadiness that children don't understand until they lose it. I was 12 when my father died of a sudden heart attack in the garage behind the shop. One afternoon, he was under a pickup truck, grease on his arms, planning to grill burgers that evening. By nightfall, men from church were carrying folding chairs into our living room, while my mother sat frozen on the couch, staring at the front door like she still believed he might walk back in. After that, the atmosphere in our house changed in ways I couldn't explain then, but can name now. My mother did not just grieve, she cracked. And instead of falling apart openly, she turned brittle. She became obsessed with keeping up appearances, as if looking stable could substitute for actually being okay. She started buying things we didn't need. New curtains, brighter lamps, decorative dishes, shoes still in boxes, furniture on payment plans. She said she was freshening the house. What she was really doing, I think, was fighting humiliation. She could not control death, but she could control what the neighbors saw through the front windows. At first, I tried to help in all the ordinary ways a good daughter thinks will matter. I made dinner. I packed lunches. I helped my little brother Noah, who was only 7 when Dad died, with homework and baths and school projects. I reminded my mother about bills when I saw red notices on the counter. I stayed out of the way when her mood was dark. I stayed close when her silence felt dangerous. Children become emotional accountants in unstable homes. We study tone, posture, footsteps, door sounds. We learn how to predict storms with no weather report. By the time I turned 16, our house looked better than ever from the street and worse than ever on paper. The repair shop had been sold. The small savings my father left was nearly gone. My mother had started borrowing against credit cards, then transferring balances, then opening new cards to cover the old ones. Each month became a shell game. Utilities got paid late. Mortgage payments staggered in after the grace period. I found unopened envelopes hidden in recipe books, under sofa cushions, inside a winter boot in her closet. Every time I asked about them, she snapped that adult problems were none of my business. Then came Derek Shaw. If every family tragedy has a season where it gets worse, Derek was ours. He arrived 2 years after my father died, smooth-voiced and overly confident, with perfect teeth and a habit of making himself useful in exactly the wrong ways. He brought flowers when he first started visiting. He called my mother Elle like he had known her forever. He talked about second chances and how she deserved to feel alive again. On the surface, he looked like the answer to loneliness. Underneath, he was gasoline on a slow fire. Derek hated that I watched him. He hated that I noticed when he borrowed money and never repaid it, when he encouraged my mother to treat herself while collectors were already calling, when he hinted that I was too serious, too controlling, too much like the husband she had lost. He understood something important very quickly. As long as I was in that house, there would be one person reminding my mother of reality. So he began doing what manipulative people do best. He turned reality into disrespect. "She's a child," he would say whenever I questioned a purchase or asked why the electric company had left another notice. "You can't let her act like she's the parent." My mother should have protected me from that. Instead, she seemed relieved someone else was willing to call me difficult. There are mothers who lean toward their children in grief. Mine leaned away. The more I matured, the more she treated my competence like an insult. Every time I solved a problem, she found a reason to resent me for seeing it in the first place. When I graduated high school, I had a partial scholarship to a community college in St. Louis. It wasn't glamorous, but to me, it felt like a doorway. I wanted to study accounting, not because it was my dream in some romantic sense, but because numbers were honest. Numbers didn't gaslight you. They didn't rewrite the past. They didn't smile while draining you dry. I planned to work part-time, commute if I had to, and slowly build a life that wasn't ruled by fear of the mailbox. But the summer before classes began, the debt in our house stopped being background noise and became a disaster. I found the final notice on a Thursday afternoon. It was folded in half and wedged under a stack of supermarket flyers by the microwave. The envelope had already been opened, which meant my mother had seen it and decided to ignore it. I unfolded the paper and felt the blood leave my face. A private lender I had never heard of was demanding immediate payment on a high-interest consolidation loan. If the balance wasn't paid within 10 days, they would begin legal action tied to the house. The house. My father's house. The one place that still felt like proof he had existed, outside photographs and silence. I read the letter 3 times, hoping I was misunderstanding it. I wasn't. The amount was far beyond what we could manage with minimum payments and excuses. It was the kind of number that only appears when someone has been making desperate choices for a long time. When my mother came home, I stood in the kitchen with the paper in my hand. I still remember how carefully I spoke. When you grow up around defensiveness, you learn to approach truth the way people approach injured animals. Slowly, with palms open. "What is this?" I asked. Her eyes flicked to the paper, then away. "Put it down." "They can take the house." I said, "Put it down." "Mom, this isn't a late bill. This is legal action." Derek was sitting at the table drinking iced tea like he paid rent there. He leaned back in his chair and gave me a lazy smile. "You really love snooping, don't you?" "I'm not snooping. It was on the counter." "It was not your place." my mother said, sharper now. You are not entitled to know every problem in this house. No, I said quietly. I just happen to live in the house you're about to lose. That was the wrong sentence. I saw it the second it landed. My mother's face changed, not toward guilt, but toward fury, the kind rooted in shame. You think because you got a little scholarship and balance your checkbook, you can stand there and talk down to me? I'm not talking down to you. I'm scared. Then maybe you should learn not to read things that are not yours. Darrett chuckled under his breath, and that small sound did more damage than yelling could have. It told me my fear was entertainment. That night, I lay awake listening to my mother and Derek argue in their bedroom. I heard my name more than once. I heard the words ungrateful, interfering, and always judging. Nobody said house. Nobody said loan. Nobody said, what do we do now? That was when I understood something terrible. The emergency was real, but the adults were still more committed to pride than survival. The next morning, I called the lender from the parking lot behind the grocery store where I worked weekends. I told them I was a family member trying to understand the situation. The woman on the phone was not warm, but she was clear. Enough clear information passed between us for my hands to start shaking. My mother had taken out the loan against the equity in the house. The balance, penalties, and fees were due within days if she wanted to stop the process moving forward. I asked whether there was any payment plan. No, the woman said. At this stage, only settlement. I asked how much. When she told me, I sat down on the curb behind the dumpsters because my legs gave out. It was almost exactly the amount I had saved if I combined everything. My scholarship refund from grants, my part-time earnings, the envelope of cash my father's sister had quietly given me after graduation, for books or emergencies. Even the small college housing deposit I had already sent and could partially recover if I withdrew before the deadline. The number didn't just represent money. It represented escape. It represented my future in a dorm room with secondhand furniture and night classes and cheap noodles, and a chance to become someone else. It represented the first doorway that had ever opened for me. I spent 2 days in a state that didn't feel like thinking so much as drowning upright. Every practical part of me said not to do it. If I gave up that money, I would be trapped longer, maybe forever. My mother might not change. Derek would certainly not leave. The debt might return. And yet, every time I tried to imagine doing nothing, I saw my father's toolbox in the garage, Noah's school backpack by the stairs, the dent in the hallway wall from the time Dad dropped a ladder and laughed about it for a week. Home was not healthy, but it was still home. I could not bear the idea of strangers walking through it with paperwork and indifference. So I made the payment. I withdrew the money in pieces because no single transaction felt real enough to contain what I was doing. I canceled my college plans. I sold the used laptop I had bought for classes. I emptied the coffee tin where I kept my tips. I even pawned the watch my father had worn every Sunday after promising myself I never would. The pawn shop slip sat in my hand like a tiny death. Then I went to the lender's office in St. Louis and handed over the cashier's check. I was 19 years old. No one hugged me. No music played. No universe paused to honor sacrifice. A clerk stamped the receipt and slid it back to me through the glass. Paid in full. I cried in my car for 10 minutes, then drove home, thinking maybe pain was easier to carry when it meant the people you loved were safe. I have replayed what happened next more times than I can count, not because I don't understand it, but because some parts of the heart keep revisiting the wound in hope of finding a different ending. My mother was at the kitchen table when I came in. Derek was there too, flipping through channels with the volume low. Noah was upstairs. I placed the receipt in front of her without a word at first. I wanted the paper to speak before emotion could ruin it. She looked at it, her brows pulled together. She read it once, then again. Derek leaned over her shoulder. "What is this?" she asked. "It's paid," I said. "The loan. The one on the house. It's done." Her eyes moved slowly from the paper to my face. There was no relief in them, no gratitude. Only a dawning, boiling humiliation I had failed to prepare for. "You paid this?" "Yes." "With what money?" "My savings." "You did what?" "I stopped them from taking the house." Derek let out a low whistle. "Wow, that is some stunt." "It's not a stunt," I said. "I was trying to help." My mother stood so abruptly the chair scraped the floor. "Trying to help? You went behind my back and inserted yourself into my finances like I'm some incompetent fool. You were going to lose the house. I was handling it." "No, you weren't." The room went silent after that. Truth is dangerous around people whose whole survival depends on denial. Derek set the remote down, suddenly energized. "She thinks she's the hero now," he said. "That's what this is. She wants you to feel small." I turned to him. "Stay out of it." "There it is," he said to my mother, almost pleased. "Respect. See how she talks to me in your house?" My mother's face crumpled, but not in the way wounded people soften. She hardened further. Some people, when confronted with love they don't believe they deserve, don't melt. They attack. Because if they admitted what you did was love, they would also have to admit how badly they failed you first. "You had no right," she said. "Mom." "No, you listen. You had no right to do this and then come in here acting like some martyr. Do you expect me to thank you? Kneel down? Apologize because my teenage daughter decided to play savior?" "I gave up college," I said before I could stop myself. "I gave up everything I had." She stared at me. Then she said the sentence that finished whatever remained of my childhood. "If you're old enough to pay grown people's debts, then you're old enough to live somewhere else." For a second, I honestly thought I had misheard her. "What?" "You heard me." Derek stood and folded his arms, saying nothing now because he didn't need to. The damage was happening beautifully on its own. "You're kicking me out?" My voice sounded very far away. "You want to be independent so badly? Be independent." "Noah is here." "Noah is my son." "And I'm your daughter." She laughed once. Not loud, not warm, just bitter. "Then maybe you should have acted like one instead of a judge." I wish I could tell you I argued brilliantly. I wish I could tell you I stood my ground and said all the right things. I did not. When the people you love betray you, language leaves the body first. I stood there, shaking, while my mother went to the hallway closet, pulled out 2 black trash bags, and threw them at my feet. "Take your things," she said, "and go." What broke me was not even the cruelty itself. It was Noah appearing halfway down the stairs in his socks, holding the railing, seeing the bags, and immediately understanding enough to start crying. "Mom," he said, "don't." She told him to go back to his room. He didn't move. I can still see his face. Small, terrified, trying to become older in real time because no adult in the room was safe. I packed in a blur. Jeans, shirts, underwear, 1 hoodie, my father's old flannel, my sketchbook, the framed photo of him and Noah fishing, my toothbrush, a jar of coins, the envelope with the paid receipt. That was all. My mother didn't help. Derek watched. Noah stuffed a granola bar into my bag when nobody was looking. That small, secret kindness nearly shattered me more than the expulsion itself. It had begun raining by the time I stepped onto the porch. I stood there with 2 trash bags at my feet, 19 years old, soaked through at the edges, homeless because I had saved the house my mother was standing inside. She never came to the door. The first place I went was the diner where I worked breakfast shifts. The owner, June Mercer, took one look at me and didn't ask the humiliating questions first. She led me into the office, gave me a towel, then a cup of coffee, then the kind of silence that lets truth come out whole. When I finally told her, she pressed her lips together hard and said, "You can sleep on my couch tonight. We'll figure out the rest in the morning." Sometimes the people who save you are not grand figures. Sometimes they're tired women in non-slip shoes with permanent burn marks on one wrist and enough decency to make room for one more broken person. June let me stay for 3 weeks. After that, she talked to her sister, who rented me a tiny attic room for almost nothing as long as I kept up the bookkeeping for her laundromat. I worked mornings at the diner, evenings at the grocery store, and took a reduced class load at the community college because I refused to let the future disappear completely, even if it arrived smaller than planned. Those first months were not cinematic. Healing rarely is. I was exhausted, ashamed and furious in rotating waves. I missed Noah constantly. He called from a friend's phone whenever he could, whispering because our mother checked the landline. He told me Derek had practically moved in. He told me Mom acted like I'd betrayed her. He told me she said I'd made a show of sacrificing for the family and then left to punish her. That was the part that hurt in a way I still struggle to explain. She had kicked me out, but in the story she told herself, I was the one who abandoned her. It took me years to understand why. Some people cannot survive as the villain in their own minds, so they rearrange the furniture of memory until their cruelty looks like self-defense. I did not see Noah in person for almost a year. When I finally did, it was at his middle school choir concert. I sat in the back, and afterward he ran to me so fast he nearly knocked me over. He had grown taller. He smelled like soap and cafeteria pizza. He clung to me with both arms and whispered, "I thought maybe you weren't coming." That sentence lodged inside me forever. "I'll always come for you," I said, and I meant it. For the next several years, my life divided itself into 2 tracks. On one track, I built, I studied, I learned spreadsheets, tax law, debt structures, budgeting, risk. I turned survival into a profession. Professors praised my discipline without knowing it had been forged in panic. Employers called me remarkably composed under pressure, without realizing pressure was the climate of my childhood. I graduated, I got a job, then a better job. Eventually, I moved to Portland and built a life so carefully that peace itself felt suspicious at first. On the second track, I carried grief that refused to stay in the past. I jumped when unknown numbers called. I hoarded savings even when my income improved. I panicked around overdue notices, even junk mail. If someone I loved said, "I'll be right back," some old frightened part of me still prepared for permanent absence. Trauma is like that. It doesn't always scream. Sometimes it just rearranges your nervous system and calls it adulthood. Noah grew up too. He left home at 18 and never really went back. He and I rebuilt slowly, then deeply. We became each other's proof that the house we came from had not destroyed everything good in us. He studied physical therapy, married a kind woman named Lena, and became the sort of father who crouches to eye level when his daughter is upset. Every time I saw him do that, something in me healed a little more. As for my mother, I heard about her in fragments. Derek left after draining what he could from her financially and emotionally. The house was eventually sold anyway, though not immediately. The irony never pleased me the way outsiders assume it should. Ruin is not satisfying when it swallows history along with the person who caused it. The house held my father's laughter. Losing it hurt, even after everything. For years, my mother never apologized. Not once. There were a few stiff birthday cards in the beginning, always written as if we had merely had a disagreement. Family is complicated. Time heals all wounds. I hope you're doing well. No acknowledgement of the night in the rain. No mention of the debt. No sentence that said, I was sorry I made your love feel like a crime. I stopped opening them after a while. Then, last winter, my phone rang on a Tuesday at 6:12 in the morning. The number was from Missouri. I almost let it go to voicemail. But something in me, instinct, dread, exhaustion, made me answer. It was Noah. His voice sounded different. Not panicked exactly, just worn thin. "Maya," he said, "Mom's in the hospital." I didn't speak right away. He went on, slower. She had developed heart complications after a long stretch of ignored health problems. The apartment manager had called him when she didn't come down for 2 days. She had been moved to a rehabilitation facility after the hospital stabilized her. She was conscious. She was angry. She was embarrassed. She was also, according to Noah, asking for me. I sat at my kitchen table while rain tapped against the window. My husband, Evan, stood across from me, reading my face like a weather map. "No," I said finally. "I don't know what she wants, but no." "I know," Noah said softly. "I told her you might not come." "Then why are you calling?" There was a long pause. "Because I found something." That sentence changed the air. He told me he had gone to her apartment to gather clothes and paperwork. Her place was cramped and cluttered, full of plastic bins and old resentment. While cleaning out a cracked cedar chest she had kept for decades, he found a stack of documents tied with a faded blue ribbon. My name was on the top envelope in my mother's handwriting, but it had never been mailed. Inside were copies of the loan papers, the paid receipt, the pawn slip for Dad's watch, my canceled college housing form, and a legal pad filled with my old handwriting. Budget calculations, work schedules, notes to myself, lists of what could be sold. One sentence written 3 times on 3 different pages. If the house stays, maybe Noah keeps one safe thing. Noah's voice broke when he read that part to me over the phone. He also found something else. A short letter I had written the night before I paid the debt and apparently hidden in the same folder, maybe meaning to give it to my mother later. I had no memory of placing it there, but grief makes archivists of us all. In the letter, 19-year-old me had written, "Mom, I know you will probably be mad that I got involved. I know you hate when I see too much, but I am doing this because I love you, and because Dad loved this house, and because Noah still needs a home. I'm not trying to shame you. I'm trying to keep us from breaking more than we already have." Noah told me my mother had read the letter in rehab 3 days earlier. "She cried," he said. I laughed once, but there was no humor in it. That took her 12 years? "I know." "Noah, what do you want from me?" "Nothing," he said immediately. "Not for her. I just thought, you should know she finally understands what you did." Finally understands. The phrase should have comforted me. Instead, it opened something raw. Because the truth is, when someone realizes your love years too late, it does not return what their blindness took from you. Recognition is not repair. Timing matters. Children do not merely need to be loved eventually, they need to be loved on time. For the next week, I lived with the question of whether to see her. Evan told me I owed no one access to my peace. Noah said he would support me either way. June, who still checked in on me after all these years like the patron saint of second chances, said, Closure is tricky. Sometimes it opens the wound wider before it seals it. Just make sure you're going for you. That was the sentence that decided it. I wasn't going to comfort my mother. I wasn't going to become the daughter she suddenly wished she had treated better. I was going because I wanted my own voice in the room, at least once while she was weak enough not to drown it out. I flew to Missouri 4 days later. The rehab facility sat on the edge of Fairwick beside a patch of winter-browned trees. The building smelled like disinfectant, overcooked vegetables, and the slow surrender of aging bodies. I stood in the lobby longer than necessary, hands cold despite the heat, watching an orderly push a wheelchair down the hall. Everything in me wanted to turn around, not because I feared her power. That was long gone. I feared the younger version of myself that still existed somewhere under all the scar tissue, the one that could hear my mother breathe and forget, for one dangerous second, how much it had cost to love her. Noah met me by the vending machines. He hugged me without speaking. In his face, I saw both the child from the stairs and the father he had become. "You don't have to stay long," he said. "I know. She's different." I looked at him. Different how? He exhaled. "Smaller. And for once, she knows it." That almost frightened me more than anger would have. When I stepped into the room, my mother was sitting up in bed with a pale blue blanket over her legs and an oxygen tube resting under her nose. Illness had taken the sharpness from her cheeks and the authority from her posture. Her hair, once so carefully styled, had thinned. Her hands looked papery. She turned toward the door, and for a moment I saw not cruelty, not history, just a tired old woman, startled by the fact that the person she had wronged had actually come. "Maya," she whispered. I didn't answer right away. I pulled the chair over and sat near the bed, close enough to hear, far enough to breathe. "You wanted to see me?" I said. Her eyes filled instantly. I had once spent years hungry for her tears. Now that they were finally there, they felt almost irrelevant. "I read your letter," she said. I nodded. I didn't know. There are apologies that open a door and apologies that merely describe a tragedy. Hers landed somewhere in between. "You knew enough," I said. She closed her eyes. "I knew you paid it. I knew you got involved. I told myself..." Her voice failed. She tried again. "I told myself you did it to prove I had failed. I told myself you wanted me to feel dependent on you. Derek said..." "Please don't use Derek to explain your choices." She flinched. It was not cruelty on my part. It was accuracy. "You're right," she said. "I'm not blaming him. I'm saying I let him help me become worse." Outside the window, bare tree branches moved against a white sky. Somewhere down the hall, a television laughed at something canned and bright. Inside the room, time pressed itself thin. "When Noah showed me those papers," she said, "I saw what you gave up. Not just the money. Everything around it. School, your plans, your father's watch." Her face crumpled then, not theatrically, but with the exhausted collapse of someone who had finally run out of lies. "You loved me, and I threw you out." I looked at her for a long time. "Yes," I said. People imagine moments like this erupt into speeches. Mine didn't. The truth had waited so long it no longer needed decoration. She cried quietly, not dramatically, not like a woman auditioning for innocence, just quietly. I let the silence stretch because I had spent too much of my life rushing to soothe emotions that were born from other people's wrongdoing. After a while, she said, "I have tried to remember exactly what I felt that night. I almost laughed. I can tell you what you felt. You felt ashamed, and you turned it into anger, because anger is easier when you don't want to hate yourself. She stared at me. Then, to my surprise, she nodded. Yes. It was the most honest thing she had ever said to me. I could not bear that my daughter had saved me, she whispered, because it meant she had seen how far I had fallen. It meant you knew I wasn't in control. I think I would rather have punished you than face my own humiliation. That is exactly what you did. I know. The old ache inside me shifted then, not healed, but named. And sometimes naming is the first form of release. She asked me if I had been happy. It was such a strange question that I nearly missed the cruelty hidden inside it. Not present cruelty, but the legacy of it. As if my life after her still required explanation, as if suffering should have remained my permanent language. Yes, I said. Not all at once, not immediately, but yes, I built something good. She smiled through tears at that, and it angered me unexpectedly. Don't do that, I said. What? Don't look relieved like my happiness absolves you. Her mouth trembled. I'm sorry. I'm glad my life turned out well, but it turned out well because other people chose not to hurt me, because I worked, because Noah survived, because strangers were kinder to me than my own mother was. She took that without defending herself. Another surprise. I deserve that, she said. I leaned back in the chair and looked at the ceiling for a second because grief is exhausting, even when it finally behaves. I spent years thinking if I had just explained myself better, if I had come in calmer, if I had kept my mouth shut about giving up college, maybe you would have seen what I was trying to do. She shook her head weakly. No, you could have said it perfectly. I was not ready to hear anything that made me feel seen. That answer hurt because it was true. The child in me had been bargaining with a locked door. Then she said something I still think about. I used to believe love was supposed to protect my dignity, she whispered. I didn't understand that sometimes love reveals your worst parts, and the test is whether you become honest or cruel. I chose cruel. There it was. Not elegant, not redemptive, just true. I wish I could tell you that in that moment I forgave her and decades of pain dissolved like mist. That is not how human hearts work. Forgiveness is not an elevator. You do not step in broken and step out healed because the right confession was spoken on the correct floor. What I felt, sitting there, was sorrow. Not for the mother I had, but for the one I never got. For the woman she could have been if shame had not ruled her life. For the girl she once was, before widowhood and pride and fear curdled her into someone who punished love when it arrived from the wrong direction. She reached toward the bedside drawer with trembling fingers. I stood and opened it for her. Inside was the blue ribbon Noah had mentioned and the folded letter. There was also something else, my father's watch. I stared at it, speechless. Noah tracked it down, she said. Same pawn shop. It had been sold and resold. He found it online from a collector. He bought it back. I picked it up carefully. The leather band had been replaced, but the scratched silver face was unmistakable. My father's watch. The one I had surrendered to save a home that still threw me out. My throat closed. She wanted you to have it, Noah said from the doorway. I hadn't even heard him come back. My mother looked at me. I don't deserve to return anything to you. I know that. But if you'll take it, it was always yours. I held the watch in both hands and felt time behave strangely. Childhood, sacrifice, rain, hunger, work, fury, love, all of it collapsed into the weight of one small object. "I'll take it," I said. She nodded, then closed her eyes from exhaustion. I should have left then. Maybe part of me intended to. But there was one sentence I had carried for so many years, it felt almost physical, like a stone in my chest. And I understood that if I walked out without saying it, I would keep carrying it forever. So I stood beside her bed and said very calmly, "I need you to hear one thing clearly." Her eyes opened again. "I did love you," I said, "deeply. More deeply than you earned. That is why what you did hurt so much. Not because I was weak, because I was your daughter." She started crying again, but I kept going. And I need you to understand something else. Realizing my love now does not give you the right to my life. I can have compassion for you and still keep distance. I can tell the truth and still walk away. Those things are not contradictions. She nodded through tears. "I know. I am not coming back to be your comfort. I know. I'm not your punishment either. I'm not going to stand here and make you beg. I came because I wanted to speak in my own voice." A long silence passed. Then, almost inaudibly, she said, "Thank you for loving me when I least deserved it." I did not answer that. Some sentences should be received, not returned. I visited one more time before flying home. The second visit was shorter and quieter. Less history, more weather. She asked about Portland, about my work, about Evan, about Noah's daughter who loved dinosaurs and refused to wear matching socks. Once or twice, I even saw the outline of the mother she might have been under better choices and greater courage. That, strangely, did not make things easier. It only made them sadder. She died 3 weeks later. When Noah called, I was standing in my office kitchen waiting for tea water to boil. I looked down at the steam and thought, so this is how endings happen. Not with orchestras, not with justice descending in visible form. Just a phone call, a pause, a breath held too long, a history closing without asking anyone whether the timing feels right. I went back for the funeral, though funeral is too grand a word for what it was. A small service, a few churchwomen, Noah and Lena, me and Evan, a pastor who spoke more kindly than accuracy required. I did not cry at the casket. My grief had never belonged to the body of my mother alone. It belonged to years, to absences, to all the moments love tried to live in our house and got turned away at the door. After the burial, Noah and I drove past the old neighborhood. The house was different now. Painted white, flower boxes in the windows, a bicycle lying in the yard. Life moved on there without asking permission from memory. I expected that to hurt more than it did. Instead, I felt something almost gentle. I used to think paying that debt was the stupidest thing I ever did, I told Noah as we sat in the parked car. Do you still think that? I looked at the house where none of us lived anymore. No, I said. I think it was the purest thing I ever did. It wasn't wise, it wasn't fair to myself, but it was pure. And I don't want her failure to turn my love into something ugly in retrospect. Noah wiped his eyes and laughed softly. That sounds like you. Maybe it did. Maybe the best revenge is not coldness. Maybe it is keeping your heart honest, even after someone mishandles it. Back in Portland, I put my father's watch on the shelf above my desk, not because I needed a symbol, but because I wanted one anyway. Some histories deserve witnesses. Sometimes survival is not about forgetting what happened. It is about arranging the evidence differently so it no longer accuses you. If there is anything my story taught me, it is this. A child's deep love is one of the most powerful forces in the world, but it should never be mistaken for permission to wound them without consequence. Children will empty their pockets, postpone their dreams, defend your name, and carry burdens too heavy for their age just to keep a family from breaking. That kind of love is sacred. If you receive it carelessly, you don't just hurt a child. You teach them to confuse devotion with self-destruction. My mother understood that too late, but late understanding is still truth, and truth matters, even when it arrives after the damage. It matters because it breaks the lie. It matters because the child inside you deserves to hear, at least once, that what happened was real, that your love was real, that your sacrifice was real, that you were never foolish for loving deeply. You were only unfortunate in where you first placed that love. And if you are listening to this while carrying your own old ache, I want to tell you what no one told me when I was 19 and standing in the rain with trash bags full of clothes. Being rejected does not make your love worthless. Being used does not make your heart weak. Sometimes the most beautiful thing about you is exactly what the wrong people failed to honor. I paid my mother's debt and lost my home that same night. Years later, she finally realized that what I gave her was never control, never judgment, never pride. It was a child's deep love, trying one last time to save what was already collapsing. She realized it late. I realized it in time. And that made all the difference.